Economist John Maynard Keynes predicted in 1930 that within a century we would be working 15 hours per week. Hasn't quite worked out that way. In fact, as author Brigid Schulte argues, we are overworked, overwhelmed, and awash in, quote, contaminated time. She lays it out in her new book, Overwhelmed, Work, Love, and Play When No One Has the Time. And Brigid joins us now from Washington, D.C. It's great to have you on the program. How are you tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Brigid, why did you decide to write this book?
Well, you know, it's really an accidental book. I'm very grateful that I had a chance to write this book because I was just screaming along in life, completely busy and not really understanding why, and definitely thinking that nothing could change. I just thought this is just the way it is. And it was completely accidental. I was working on a project on a completely different subject, and it required looking into time use research, which I didn't know anything about. And it was about how women are busy. And I called up this time use researcher, and he said, no, women aren't busy. They have 30 hours of leisure a week. And when he said that, I about fell out of my chair. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have 30 hours of leisure. And he said, yes, you do. Come and do a time study. I will show you where your leisure is. And honestly, that's what started this whole journey. I did the time study with him. I wrote about it for the Washington Post magazine, where I'm a reporter and a staff writer, and it just blew up from there. The response that I got in email nearly shut down the servers in the Washington Post. And most people said, you know, you climbed into my head and you wrote about my life, because nobody feels like they have any leisure, much less 30 hours of it.
Your life does sound insane from the way you describe it. You've got a couple of kids, you work for the Washington Post. You've got a husband, you are, of course, multitasking all the time. Is it presumptuous or kind of nasty of me to suggest that maybe you'd have a little bit more time in life if you didn't write a book on top of all of that?
Well, and I have to tell you, if you read chapter 1, that is absolutely what it felt like. I felt like I was living with my hair on fire all the time. I do not feel that way now. I'm certainly not a guru. I have learned a lot, but I have a long way to go. But I have a much clearer sense of where so much of this pressure of overwork and overwhelm and overparenting and overdoing comes from. And I try to really live a very different life, or at least I approach it very differently. So. Like I say, work in progress, not a guru, but a whole lot better than chapter 1.
Let's give people a sense of actually what your life was like. Here's an excerpt from the book. This is how it feels to live my life, scattered, fragmented, and exhausting. I am always doing more than one thing at a time and feel I never do anything particularly well. I am always behind and always late, with one more thing and one more thing and one more thing to do before rushing out the door. Entire hours evaporate while I'm doing stuff that needs to get done. But once I'm done, I can't tell you what it was I did or why it seemed so important. I feel like the Red Queen of Through the Looking Glass on speed, running as fast as I can, usually on the fumes of 4 or 5 hours of sleep and getting nowhere. Like the dream I keep having about trying to run a race wearing ski boots. Okay, that was your experience, Brigid. How common do you think that experience is for North Americans?
Well, I have to tell you, when I first wrote the magazine article, and I was terrified that I would be exposing myself as this crazy, disorganized person, that there's something really wrong with me, and that everybody else had life wired, and they lived very differently. And I have to tell you, after I wrote that story and I got all of those emails from people, I realized, wow, it's not just me. And if it's not just me, this is not some epidemic of personal failure. What's going on? You know, and there is that sense of always one more thing to do, and your to-do list never ends, and you're trying to kind of get to the end of it, and you're multitasking, and you feel like you can never do enough at work. And you know, so much of that is because work is changing, and there's so much uncertainty about what the future is. And you feel like you can never do enough with your kids if you're a parent. And some of that is because our parenting standards have really, they've never been higher, which is crazy because so many of us work. You know, so you've got these impossible standards that we're all trying to live up to. And then the craziest thing is I really did a lot of looking into, why is busyness such a badge of honor? Why do we say we're so busy? I mean, think about how you talk to your friends, you know, how you're doing. Oh, I'm fried. We're so crazy busy. It's really become the way we talk to each other. And I really unpacked that. I looked into, well, where did that come from? And why is saying that you did nothing, or you had leisure time or downtime, it's sort of like you're seen as a loser. Like, how did that happen? And so I think that's really important, is to see that there are a lot of external pressures right now that really can act on us, and we get so busy that we're not able to see them. Well, so a lot of what I learned in the book and what I try to do in the book is just to show the water that we're swimming in so that we can start making different choices.
Well, you pose some good questions there. Where do you think this notion that we have to show everybody how absolutely up to our neck we are in everything, where does that come from?
It's a really good question. And you started out by a century ago. The way we showed our status was our leisure time. The more idle time you had, it showed that you were wealthy. It showed that you had high status. And that's completely flipped. And now when you look at, who are the people with money and status, they're running around and it's great. Bill Gates is trying to solve malaria in Africa. And, our sort of captains of industry now, if you will, are really busy people. And, as humans, we always try to kind of compare upwards. So we're all trying to catch up and do as much as they are. And that's why college applications are so nuts. And you've got kids feeling like they need to start nonprofits and, overdoing just to get into college. So it's really been this gradual kind of speeding up, if you will, of life. And as I looked at it, it really kind of started in the 1980s. That's when you had a lot of change in the workforce. In North America in particular, you had a lot of manufacturing jobs disappear. So you had kind of stress at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum as people are trying to cobble together several different jobs. And then work hours for office workers, knowledge workers, really began to climb in the 1980s. And so what you have is like this kind of division in the way people live and work, and each end is stressed and busy for different reasons.
I'm going to take even back further. Let's go back 100 years to Henry Ford, when he was saying things like a shift ought to be 8 hours long, because if you're making cars for longer than 8 hours, after 8 hours you start to make mistakes. Okay, that was 100 years ago. How about today? Do we know where that dividing line is between I can be effective up until this point, but then after that there's diminishing returns after that?
That is such an important question. And you have so many people who are working so many hours and not getting paid for them, by the way. A lot of salaried workers just put in all of these crazy hours. And you've got people saying, whatever happened to the 40-hour work week, sort of longing for an 8-hour day. Like, that seems normal now. But I think the real question is, we do not know. There is not any real good research right now how long you can work as a knowledge worker and be effective. What does it take to be a real effective worker? There are some kind of studies that have been done in different companies that show maybe about 5 or 6 hours a day that you can do focused, concentrated work. Otherwise, you're just a butt in the chair after that. And yet we don't believe it. And we tend to think that the longer you work, the better you're going to be, the more productive you're going to be. And listen, I fall into that all the time. It's a really bad habit. It's a very powerful belief in North America, and it's completely false. What we're finding is that you need concentrated work, but you also need breaks to kind of activate both systems of your brain to be fully creative and fully innovative. You need task on, and you need breaks, because that's when insight comes.
Well, that leads me nicely to Parenthood, and I want to pick up on something you said earlier. Your time guru, John Robinson, who you introduced in the first chapter of your book, suggests that mothers have more time today and spend more time today with their children than their counterparts of, say, 50 years ago, which conventional wisdom would tell you is absolutely not true, but he says it is. You want to explain that for us?
Well, I think what is true, and he was one of, there were 3 of them that did this fascinating research a couple years ago, Suzanne Bianchi, Melissa Milkey, and John Robinson. Melissa Milkey is there at the University of Toronto, fascinating and amazing researcher. And what they did, you're right, conventional wisdom said, oh my goodness, all these mothers went into the workforce, they're abandoning their kids, they're neglecting them, they're terrible. And so then you had a whole generation, including me, that felt incredibly guilty that you could never do enough with your kids. And then what they did is they actually looked at time diaries. And when they added up all of the time that working mothers and at-home mothers spent with their kids, they came up with this surprising finding that today's working mothers spend as much, if not more, time with their children than stay-at-home moms did in the 60s and 70s. And that blew everybody's mind. How did that happen? How could that possibly be? Well, you have a couple different norms. In the 60s and 70s, mom was home, maybe doing the laundry, vacuuming, whatever. Kids would come in and out. They'd play in the street. It's like, go out and play till the street lights come on. So they were not in presence of their kids. Today, you've got helicopter parenting, hovering. We're like killing ourselves to get our kids to lessons and being with them. You're trying to read to them all the time. You're engaged with them all the time. You're kind of driving yourself crazy. You're trying to spend time with your kids. And what they found is that mothers gave up time for sleep, time for personal care, and all of their leisure time, what had once been leisure for them, was spent with their children, on their children, for their children. So if you look at time diaries today, mothers have almost no time to themselves, what we like to call me time. And the interesting thing is that as parenting norms are changing for fathers, as younger men want to be more involved, want to be, different kinds of fathers than the distant fathers they may have had, men today are starting to feel that same pressure, that same time stress. And if you look at the time diaries, what's fascinating is they're beginning to give up on sleep, personal care, spending all of their leisure time with their kids, which is why now surveys are showing that sometimes fathers feel more stressed out by work-life conflict than mothers do. So there's really some fascinating things going on in our culture. And so much of that is because we were so afraid that we were going to kind of hurt our children when mothers went to work. We've kind of overcompensated for it. And that's not been good for anybody.
My hunch is we'd like not to be that way, but many of us are that way because we watch the news and we're terrified that every time our child takes a step out the front door of the house, they're not going to come home that night because 247 different terrible things will happen to them during the course of the day. How do we get over that?
It's really true. And, and I think that's another one of these kind of very powerful myths that we live under. It's really not true. When you look at all of the data and you can look rationally, crime levels are actually lower than they were in the 60s and 70s when we let our kids run out and play. I went to the park by myself when I was 4. I actually called my mother the other day. It's like, did you really let me go to the park by myself? And she's like, well, yeah, it was half a block away. Granted, there was a really busy street right near it. But I went with like my older sister who was 6, and today what's crazy, just here in Washington, D.C., we've got parents who let their kids walk home from a park. It was about a mile away. And a neighbor called Child Protective Services on them. There was an investigation. So our parenting norms really have gotten out of whack because we hover, we kind of over smother our kids. We think that that's what we should do. Everybody's trying to do the best. I mean, we all have the best intentions. But if you look rationally, that's not good for us. It's not good for the kids because we're smothering their sense of independence. We're not allowing them to fail and learn to pick themselves up and keep moving, to develop grit and resilience. And what you're seeing then is like when they get into college, you talk to college counselors, you got a quarter of all freshmen in most North American universities who are on anti-anxiety medication or depressants because they've been so overscheduled and so hovered over, they don't know who they are. They don't know what they like. And making decisions is really fraught. It's a very frightening thing. So that's why the book is sort of like a gigantic call for saying, let's all take a deep breath. Let's look at what's really real and see if we can make different decisions, both largely as a society and individually as well.
Well, when we compare societies, the one that you took a look at and seemed to like is Denmark. What are the Danes doing that you think we're not, that have got them on a better track than us?
Well, I think the important thing is to look at, look, North America, Canada, the United States, we're not Denmark. Denmark is very small, it's very homogenous. The reason that I went to Denmark, though, is I went to a time use conference and they were comparing leisure time of men and women and parents around the world. And Denmark was really an outlier because men and women had more leisure time there than in any of the other countries studied. And there was the smallest gap between men and women. And usually men have a lot more leisure time than women do because women are tied up in housework and childcare duties. And so their leisure time is shorter and tends to be fragmented and scattered. That's true kind of globally when you look at the global time use data. So that was really, I was curious about that. Well, how can that be? How can they have so much more leisure time than other countries? And how can women and mothers have so much leisure time? Mothers in Denmark had the most time to themselves, pure leisure time, than mothers in any other country. Like I said, in North America, mothers have no leisure time to themselves. So that's why I went to Denmark. And I do think that there are things that we can learn from them. It's not, I'm not saying let's be Denmark, because every culture is different and you have to find your own set point. But what I learned there is that work, they really have the sense of effective work. That work is something that you do intensely for short hours, and when it's over, it's over. And you know, it's not something that kind of like seeps into everything that often happens here, particularly with technology that kind of keeps us always on. And then our work cultures that value these long work hours, so that if you answer an email at 2 in the morning, you feel really proud of yourself. In Denmark, they think that there's something wrong with you if you cannot get your work done in that 40-hour work week. So that's one thing that's huge. And they've got laws and policies that support that. They've got a culture that supports that. They also have a real value of gender equality. So just as they want women to lean into the workplace, they want men to lean out. That's the only way you're ever going to get equality, either at home or at work. And so they have men take solo parental leave there. That's become a norm. Whereas in North America, lots of companies don't even give men parental leave, maybe a day, or maybe they'll say you can take some vacation time. And there isn't that same kind of standard that it's okay for men to take leave. And if men take leave early, then they develop this competence and confidence that they are a parent, and it changes the entire relationship with their kids and also the division of labor at home. So that's huge. They actually have a minister of gender equality in the cabinet. That value is so important to them. So I think that's something that we can all learn. I think we say that we want gender equality and we don't follow it up, and there's an awful lot of implicit bias still that we don't even see that really keeps us all stuck in these kind of 1950s roles. And the last thing, in Denmark, they really have a value of leisure time, that it's important not just to do more productive and better work, not just to be refreshed with your family, but to really live a full life. They have these things called catalog classes, and I had a friend translate what it said on the top. And you can take any class you want, it's affordable, they're easily accessible, and if you look on one of the tops of the catalogs, it says, "For the wisdom and enjoyment of humanity." That's a beautiful value. I think that that is certainly one that we can learn to recapture here as well.
Indeed. Well, I feel less overwhelmed having read the book, and this book really can change your life if you read it and you implement some of the ideas that you've got in it. So we thank you for writing it. Overwhelmed, Work, Love, and Play When No One Has the Time. Brigid Schulte, it's awfully good of you to join us on the line from the District of Columbia. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.